two blackouts, back to back. One, everyone remembers, the October 1st, 2025 US government shutdown that froze half the nation's systems. The other, almost no one does. September 1st, 2025, 1 month earlier, a billion-dollar spacecraft trained its cameras on one of the strangest objects ever to enter our solar system. The mission was routine, public, and fully transparent until the feed went dark. Not for hours, but for days. 3 days in which a historic encounter vanished into silence. What happened during those 72 hours has never been officially explained. The data gap sits there like a scar on the record, unacknowledged by NASA, dismissed by the European Space Agency, and yet impossible to ignore. Because when the systems came back online, the object they were meant to study, an interstellar visitor known as 3I Atlas, was already gone. This story begins not with discovery, but with disappearance, with a silence that should not exist in an age when every byte of space data streams in real time to public servers. It begins with a spacecraft called Psyche, designed to study the metallic asteroid 16 Psyche, but briefly diverted to image this unexpected guest from beyond the stars. And just as the encounter was about to happen, just as the camera should have captured the first high-resolution photographs of an interstellar traveler, the archive went blank. Some called it coincidence, others saw a cover-up. The timing didn't fit the official narrative. The US government shutdown wouldn't happen for another month. No technical bulletin mentioned a malfunction. No press release acknowledged a delay. There was just a hole, empty days in which the record of one of the most anticipated observations in modern astronomy simply didn't exist. And yet, the deeper researchers looked, the stranger the pattern became. Across the Atlantic, the European Space Agency's ExoMars Trace Gas Orbiter, another probe with a clear line of sight to the same object, quietly delayed the release of its data, not by days or weeks, but until the year 2099. When pressed, the date was corrected to April 2026, still months away. In the world of space science, such delays are unheard of. Transparency is standard. Yet for this one visitor, the silence stretched across continents. What was so unusual about 3I Atlas that two major agencies, NASA and ESA, would both go dark? The early data that did reach the public hinted at something profoundly odd, a jet of material erupting toward the sun rather than away from it. A comet that defied the most basic rule of celestial mechanics. And beneath that anomaly lay a deeper, more unsettling question. Was this object even a comet at all? In the months that followed, the blackout became more than a technical curiosity. It became a fault line in the story of how humanity looks at the universe. For the first time, the transparency we take for granted in space exploration seemed to fracture. It wasn't just data that disappeared, it was trust. Tonight, we pull back the curtain on those missing days, on the silence that stretched between Psyche's cameras and the public record. Because what vanished in early September 2025 may not be an accident of bureaucracy or malfunction. It may be the first signal that the universe is no longer quiet. This is the silence between the stars. The missing days. The first hint that something was wrong came quietly, noticed not by NASA officials or journalists, but by a small network of independent astronomers who monitor public space data in real time. They were the first to realize that the Psyche mission's image feed, normally updated every few hours, had stopped without warning. No new photos appeared in the archive. No telemetry charts refreshed. What had been a living stream of data simply froze. At first, no one panicked. The Psyche spacecraft, launched in 2023 to study the metallic asteroid 16 Psyche, was known to undergo periodic calibrations. A brief pause in uploads wasn't unusual, but as hours stretched into days, the silence began to feel deliberate. Researchers logged into NASA's Planetary Data System, the public database where every image, every line of raw code from Psyche's instruments is automatically posted, and found nothing. September 1st, missing. September 2nd, missing. September 3rd and 4th, still missing. September 5th, nothing at all. Then, as suddenly as it had stopped, the stream resumed on September 8th. But those lost days, 5 of them in total, were gone. The gap was not labeled, not flagged, not explained. The metadata that should have marked timestamps in the archive simply jumped ahead as if those days had never existed. To most of the world, this was invisible. The average person doesn't track spacecraft telemetry logs. But to the handful of scientists and enthusiasts who do, the missing period coincided with a highly anticipated event: the approach of 3I Atlas, an interstellar object entering the inner solar system for the first time. NASA's own mission briefings had listed 3I Atlas as a secondary observational target for Psyche. That meant its cameras had been scheduled to capture images of the object between September 3rd and 4th, precisely the middle of the blackout. What made this timing so uncanny was how public the plan had been. For months, 3I Atlas had fascinated astronomers. Like 2017's Oumuamua, it was traveling far too fast to have originated from our solar system. Its orbit cut through the plane of the planets at an odd angle, as though arriving from deep interstellar space. It wasn't supposed to be there, and the chance to observe it was unprecedented. The Psyche mission had everything needed for the job: a pair of high-resolution cameras capable of resolving metal surfaces with pinpoint clarity. The alignment was perfect. When the object passed within range, Psyche's instruments could have captured details no telescope on Earth could ever match: surface textures, structural geometry, maybe even reflective anomalies. For planetary scientists, it was a golden opportunity. For some, it might have been history. But instead of images, the world got silence. When journalists reached out to NASA for comment, the agency didn't respond. There was no official notice of a malfunction, no technical bulletin, no press release acknowledging the missing days. The agency simply acted as though nothing unusual had happened. The blackout was invisible in every official document. That absence became the story. In the online astronomy community, Reddit forums, Discord servers, independent research blogs, people began piecing together the timeline. Some pointed to the government shutdown announced for October as a possible factor, but others quickly dismissed that theory. How could an October event explain a September blackout? The timing didn't align. And besides, NASA's servers are distributed across multiple locations. A political shutdown couldn't selectively erase a spacecraft's data feed weeks earlier. Still, the gap remained unexplained. A few researchers proposed a more mundane answer. Perhaps Psyche had entered safe mode, a built-in procedure that suspends non-critical systems if sensors detect anomalies. Others speculated that a data compression failure had corrupted transmissions during that window. Yet those explanations all shared one flaw. NASA usually announces them. Every previous time Psyche had gone into safe mode, the event was documented publicly, often within hours. Transparency was the rule, not the exception, until now. Meanwhile, something else was happening. Across the Atlantic, the European Space Agency's ExoMars Trace Gas Orbiter, a completely different mission, operated by a separate government, had also been scheduled to observe 3I Atlas. Its data archive, too, showed something strange: a release date stamped for the year 2099. A placeholder that effectively locked the data away for a human lifetime. It was as if both agencies, in separate hemispheres and under separate administrations, had simultaneously decided to hold their cards close. That coincidence was enough to ignite whispers. A few voices on social media claimed the missing data must have captured something NASA didn't want the public to see, an object with unnatural geometry, or perhaps even evidence of active propulsion. These were only speculations, but they spread fast. In an era when conspiracy theories travel faster than light, the absence of official answers only deepened suspicion. Still, beyond the noise, the question remained uncomfortably scientific. How could two of the most advanced space agencies in the world lose or lock away data from the same object at the same time? Whatever Three-Eyed Atlas was, it had already broken one rule. Its comet-like jets pointed towards the sun instead of away. The laws of thermal sublimation said that shouldn't happen. And now, those who might have confirmed or debunked that behavior, the engineers and scientists behind Psyche, had gone silent too. 3 missing days, a jet that defied physics, and 2 agencies that chose not to talk. In isolation, each detail might be coincidence, but together, they trace the outline of something more deliberate, a pattern of silence forming where discovery should have been. And if history has taught us anything, it's that silence in science is never just the absence of data. It's the presence of a decision. Part 2. The Lockbox. When NASA went silent, it was easy for skeptics to wave the event away. A temporary glitch, some said. A data backlog, nothing more. But then, something equally strange began to unfold thousands of miles away in Europe. The European Space Agency's ExoMars Trace Gas Orbiter, known as TGO, was never meant to make headlines. Its job was steady, almost mundane, to measure methane and other gases in the thin Martian atmosphere. But among its long list of observational tasks was a scheduled sequence to track a fast-moving interstellar object in the inner solar system. That object, of course, was Three-Eyed Atlas. When the TGO team published its standard public data schedule, essentially a list of upcoming releases that researchers worldwide rely on to plan their work, one line caught attention. The release date for the Three-Eyed Atlas observations wasn't listed for 2025 or even 2026. It was stamped 2099. At first, it looked like a typo, a placeholder, some stray string of digits auto-filled by the system. But the more people looked, the stranger it became. Dozens of entries were normal, dated within weeks of data collection. But this single dataset connected to Three-Eyed Atlas had been pushed 74 years into the future. The reaction was swift. Online forums lit up with speculation. Was this a glitch or a deliberate delay? Why would any scientific agency schedule a release so far away that none of the current team members would even live to see it? ESA eventually responded, but not in the way anyone expected. Without public explanation, the 2099 timestamp quietly disappeared and was replaced with a new one, April 3, 2026. The new date was closer, yes, but still months beyond the normal turnaround for open data. It wasn't just that the timeline changed, it was that it changed after the anomaly had been noticed. Scientists familiar with ESA's data systems pointed out something unsettling. To alter timestamps, someone inside the agency had to manually adjust the release settings. It wasn't an automatic correction, it was a decision. And that decision raised the same question already hanging over NASA's blackout. What was being withheld and why? There are rules for this sort of thing. In modern space science, transparency is codified into mission agreements. Most raw data from spacecraft are public within hours, sometimes minutes. Even when processing or calibration delays occur, the existence of the data is never hidden. Researchers can see the pipeline, track the progress, and anticipate release dates. But here, ESA's system didn't say the data were being processed. It said they didn't exist until 2099. Then, when people noticed, it said, wait until 2026. It was as if someone had taken the most public instrument in European space exploration and wrapped it in a classified seal. When journalists pressed the agency, the official statement was brief. A metadata formatting issue caused incorrect dates to appear in the archive. The problem has since been resolved. On paper, it sounded plausible. In practice, it didn't hold up. Metadata errors don't target specific datasets. They corrupt entire tables, entire months, entire missions. Not one object, one date, one moment. And yet, the only dataset affected in the entire archive was 3I Atlas. If that was a coincidence, it was a surgical one. Behind the scenes, several European researchers began comparing notes. Some whispered that a lockbox protocol might have been activated, a rarely used data handling rule that allows sensitive information to be sequestered from public release under exceptional circumstances. These circumstances were meant for cases like national security hazards, contamination risks, or the detection of potentially hazardous asteroids before formal verification. But none of those applied here. 3I Atlas wasn't a threat. It was already outbound, leaving the inner solar system. Its trajectory was well known. The only thing about it that could be considered dangerous was its mystery, and that, perhaps, was the problem. ESA's lockbox policy, if invoked, would mean the data were not just delayed, they were classified, temporarily sealed for internal review before being made public. In the language of bureaucracies, temporary can stretch indefinitely. When asked about it on record, a senior member of ESA's science directorate dismissed the idea outright. We don't classify science data. That's not what we do, but his wording was careful. We don't classify science data. It left room for interpretation. What if the data were no longer considered science? What if they had been reclassified as something else entirely, something outside ESA's civilian mandate? That distinction, science versus something else, is where the speculation began to spiral. In October 2025, the Psyche blackout had already stirred doubts about NASA's openness. Now, ESA's strange timestamp was adding to the unease. Two agencies, one object, and an identical pattern. Silence where transparency should have been. Online, researchers began calling it the lockbox, a term that quickly took on mythic weight. It represented more than just missing data. It symbolized the quiet hand of institutional control, the invisible line between public knowledge and protected information. One astrophysicist put it bluntly in an interview. We don't lock away boring data. If something gets delayed, it's because it matters. The question isn't whether there's data, it's what's in it. Meanwhile, on independent networks, amateur astronomers kept tracking 3I Atlas from Earth. What they saw defied easy explanation. A faint, pulsing halo that changed shape under solar wind, and a narrow jet that seemed to flicker rather than flow. It wasn't behavior typical of a comet or asteroid. It looked controlled. If that's what ESA's instruments had captured, if that's what NASA's Psyche had seen during its blackout, then the decision to seal the data might not have been about malfunction at all. It might have been about shock. Because if 3-eyed Atlas was natural, its physics were broken. And if it wasn't natural, then so were the rules of everything we thought we knew about what travels between the stars. The lockbox wasn't just a delay, it was a message, a silent one. And it said, "Not yet." Part 3, The Sunward Jet. If there was one image that shattered scientific composure, it arrived quietly in mid-August 2025, weeks before the NASA blackout, before the ESA lockbox, before anyone realized the story was about to fracture. It came from a network of ground-based telescopes in Hawaii and Chile that had been tracking 3I Atlas since its inbound trajectory was confirmed earlier that summer. At first glance, it was just another comet. Its brightness curve rose predictably as it neared the sun. Spectral analysis showed volatile gases, carbon dioxide, water vapor, cyanide, standard cometary fare. But then, something caught the eyes of the observers at the Keck Observatory in Mauna Kea. The tail was wrong. Every comet, from Halley to 67P, follows a simple rule. As sunlight heats the surface, frozen gases sublimate, blasting out from the nucleus and forming a tail that always points away from the sun. Radiation pressure and the solar wind push the dust and gas outward, like a candle's smoke carried by the wind. The geometry is textbook, simple, elegant, immutable. Except 3I Atlas didn't follow it. In the new images, its main jet, bright, narrow, and impossibly sharp, pointed toward the sun. Not away, not at an angle, directly into the solar glare. It was the kind of image that forces you to check your instruments, your code, your sanity. Because in the language of comet physics, that jet shouldn't exist. Within days, observatories across the world confirmed it. The anti-tail, the faint stream pointing opposite the primary tail, was behaving normally. But the dominant emission plume was sunward, cutting against every expectation of how solar radiation interacts with volatile materials. For planetary scientists, this wasn't just unusual, it was heretical. The initial explanations were cautious. Maybe 3I Atlas was rotating rapidly, and the jet was a temporary projection effect. Maybe the surface vents were positioned such that gas appeared to blow inward from our line of sight. But those models collapsed when later spectroscopic data showed the jet's velocity. Material was moving into the solar wind, not merely appearing to. This wasn't an illusion. Something was pushing against the sun. The data only got stranger. Using spectroscopic filters, researchers measured the chemical composition of the jet. It was rich in nickel and cyanide, elements seen before in comet outgassing, but never in this particular ratio. Nickel emissions suggested high temperatures, hundreds of degrees above the sublimation threshold of typical cometary ice. That meant something else was happening beneath the surface. One astronomer compared it to a heat vent, not an evaporation. Another was more blunt. This isn't sublimation, this is propulsion. The statement was half in jest, but it lingered. What mechanism could possibly drive a jet toward the sun? No natural process seemed to fit. Solar wind pressure couldn't reverse direction. Magnetic effects were too weak. Unless 3I Atlas was somehow interacting with solar radiation in a way we'd never seen, the phenomenon defied explanation. As the data circulated, a handful of independent researchers began whispering the unthinkable. What if it wasn't natural at all? For those who remembered the earlier interstellar visitor Oumuamua, the parallels were chilling. In 2017, Oumuamua had shown non-gravitational acceleration, speeding up slightly as it left the solar system, as though propelled by an invisible hand. Some scientists suggested it might be a light sail, a fragment of alien technology pushed by starlight. Others dismissed the idea as overreach. But now, 8 years later, 3I Atlas was showing behavior that made Oumuamua look tame. This time, there was visual proof, a comet defying the sun. NASA was scheduled to follow up the ground data with high-resolution imaging from Psyche in early September. The alignment was perfect. The spacecraft's instruments were capable of resolving details smaller than 100 meters across. A clear shot of the nucleus could have confirmed whether the jet originated from a vent, a fissure, or something manufactured. And then, on the very day those images were supposed to arrive, Psyche's feed went dark. The coincidence was too perfect. The August data had revealed the most anomalous feature yet, the sunward jet. And just as the next instrument capable of clarifying it came online, the archive vanished into silence. Was it luck, timing, or something more deliberate? The simplest explanation, the one NASA never gave, was that Psyche had captured something it shouldn't have, perhaps a geometric structure, perhaps light reflecting from metallic surfaces, perhaps evidence that 3I Atlas wasn't a comet at all, but a machine. That possibility electrified the online research community. Blogs and podcasts dissected every available image. Some users enhanced brightness levels, claiming to see symmetrical patterns within the halo. Others pointed out faint, pulsing variations in the jet intensity, too regular to be random. Of course, none of it was conclusive. Pattern seeking is human nature, and space photography is unforgiving. But still, the idea refused to die. For decades, astronomers had dreamed of finding an interstellar object that told us something about other worlds. Nobody expected it might tell us something about ourselves, about the limits of what we were willing to admit we saw. By September 2025, the word sunward had become taboo in certain scientific circles. It implied intent, direction, choice. The physics community began to fracture between those who demanded extraordinary evidence and those who simply couldn't explain away the data. In private messages between observatories, one line recurred: "If the jet points toward the sun, then it knows where the sun is." That single sentence changed everything. Because if the object knew its orientation, if its emissions were not random but deliberate, then 3I Atlas wasn't just reacting to the solar wind, it was interacting with it, and that would make it something we have never before encountered, a machine powered by the star it approached. 4-part: The Silence from Psyche after September 8, 2025. The Psyche mission came back online. The data feed resumed exactly as before. Timestamps regular, telemetry stable, image sequences normal. To anyone glancing at the archive, it was as if nothing had happened. But for those tracking the spacecraft's every move, the silence that had preceded it was deafening. No acknowledgement appeared in the mission logs. No footnote explained the blackout. The official feed jumped from August 31st straight to September 8th, as if a week had been surgically removed from time. Yet that missing window between September 1st and 5th was the precise period when Psyche should have captured its closest images of 3I Atlas. What happened in those missing days has never been publicly explained. The Psyche spacecraft wasn't some forgotten probe adrift in the void. It was one of NASA's flagship missions, equipped with dual imagers, spectrometers, and a state-of-the-art communications suite. Its cameras were capable of resolving metallic surfaces in such stunning detail that they were compared to aerial photography of Earth. And unlike most deep spacecraft, Psyche's data pipeline was designed for transparency. Every raw image was automatically uploaded to NASA's open server within hours, so when that transparency vanished, people noticed. Initially, some mission followers assumed the spacecraft had entered safe mode, a common precaution triggered by onboard faults. But Psyche's status page showed no alerts, no warnings, and no telemetry anomalies. Communications with the Deep Space Network remained nominal. The spacecraft wasn't offline. It was silent by choice. NASA, however, said nothing. Normally, even minor interruptions, sensor resets, calibration cycles, data processing errors, are accompanied by bulletins. The absence of any comment became a statement in itself. As days turned into weeks, independent analysts started cross-referencing NASA's other databases. They found no trace of deleted files, no evidence of server corruption. The missing data weren't lost, they were absent. They had never been posted. Then came the subtler discovery. On Psyche's onboard log summary, accessible through a public engineering interface, several lines of time-stamped activity had been redacted. The entries read simply, "Event under review." No further description, no context. The notation had never appeared in the spacecraft's logs before. Whatever had happened during those days wasn't a failure. It was an event. The deeper question was, what kind of event could silence a spacecraft designed for continuous observation? The explanations fell into three categories: technical, procedural, and intentional. The technical theory held that Psyche's imaging system suffered a transient malfunction, perhaps radiation interference or an onboard software error that forced a data buffer reset. But that didn't explain why the telemetry and engineering streams remained unbroken. In every prior case of malfunction, those too had been disrupted. This time, only the cameras stopped transmitting. The procedural theory suggested a review embargo. Maybe Psyche captured something unexpected: anomalous readings, glare contamination, or debris that required verification. Agencies sometimes delay data release while confirming accuracy, but even then, NASA typically issues placeholder files or explanatory notes. Here, the blackout was absolute. That left the third possibility: intentional withholding. It was a hypothesis no one at NASA would ever admit publicly, but it fit the evidence too neatly to ignore. If Psyche's instruments had recorded something deemed sensitive, something whose implications extended beyond planetary science, then the decision to withhold the images would not come from mission control. It would come from higher up. There is precedent for this. During the Cold War, reconnaissance satellites returning images of Earth often captured astronomical phenomena, including meteors and comets. Much of that data remained classified for decades, buried under defense protocols. Even within NASA, some Apollo-era materials were restricted until long after the missions ended. When information challenges existing frameworks or touches areas considered strategically significant, silence becomes the default response. To imagine that such a thing could happen again in 2025 felt absurd. And yet, that's exactly how the timeline looked. Between August and September, Psyche had the perfect vantage point to observe 3I Atlas. The object's sunward jet had just been documented by ground-based telescopes. The spacecraft's cameras were aligned to capture it in unprecedented detail. The observation window lasted roughly 3 days, and then darkness. No images, no reports, no follow-up papers. After September 8th, Psyche's mission communications resumed, but the spacecraft never again mentioned 3I Atlas. The topic simply disappeared from official channels. Mission scientists who had previously discussed the opportunity in public interviews stopped referencing it altogether. One of them, when asked on social media about the results, replied only, "That dataset's under internal review." The message was deleted an hour later. From that point onward, the silence was total. It wasn't just missing data anymore, it was missing language. The project's own scientists were erasing their earlier enthusiasm. Conference presentations that had included 3I Atlas as a potential target were revised to remove its name. The line item vanished from the mission website's extended observation schedule. Even archived press briefings were quietly edited. To outside observers, this looked less like omission and more like revision. History itself was being rewritten. One researcher, speaking anonymously, summarized it bitterly: Psyche didn't fail. Psyche succeeded, and that's the problem. If the spacecraft had truly malfunctioned, NASA would have said so. If the data had been corrupted, they would have posted calibration notices. Instead, they erased the encounter from their narrative, which suggested that something had been captured, something that couldn't be easily explained or safely shown. The pattern was now unmistakable. First, the telescope saw a jet pointing toward the sun, a violation of comet physics. Then, the spacecraft capable of confirming it went dark. Then, the European data that might have offered independent verification was pushed into a lockbox. 3 systems, 3 silences, 1 object. Coincidence? Perhaps, but the odds were collapsing. By mid-October, a handful of independent analysts began to refer to this alignment of anomalies as the blackout pattern. Not a conspiracy, but a behavior, an institutional reflex triggered when data challenge what official science can comfortably explain. And for the first time, a new possibility emerged in whispers between observatories and government contractors alike. Maybe the silence wasn't caused by fear of error. Maybe it was caused by fear of recognition. Because what if Psyche had not just seen a comet? What if it had seen something designed to look like one? Part 5. The Timeline Gap. By late October 2025, independent analysts had mapped out every second of Psyche's transmission schedule. NASA's public logs and Deep Space Network data, they reconstructed an exact timeline, signal strength, latency, and power usage for each subsystem. What emerged was something no one expected. During the blackout, Psyche hadn't gone offline at all. It had been active. Telemetry graphs showed subtle fluctuations, minor thruster corrections, data bursts, brief power surges in its imaging suite. The spacecraft wasn't idle, it was working. Yet the output of that work, the images, the spectra, the scientific results, was missing. To researchers, that made no sense. Every packet of data transmitted from Psyche leaves a digital fingerprint. Even if the images themselves are redacted, metadata usually remains. But in this case, the record contained gaps of zeros, entire entries replaced with blank numeric strings. Those placeholders weren't corrupt, they were deliberate. Someone had removed the payloads and overwritten the identifiers to make it appear as if nothing had ever been sent. That discovery changed the investigation's tone. It was no longer about a malfunction, it was about erasure. The deeper analysts looked, the more inconsistencies they found. A NASA operations memo released under the Freedom of Information Act showed that during the blackout, Psyche's data routing had been temporarily reassigned to restricted relay channels. In other words, transmissions had been diverted. To where? No one knew. The timing of the reassignment matched the precise period when Psyche would have been closest to 3I Atlas. The memo was dated September 2nd, right in the middle of the missing days. Then another thread surfaced. A contractor for NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory anonymously shared fragments of an internal communication marked Review Level 4 Sensitive Material. It referenced unexpected structural readings inconsistent with natural morphology. The source couldn't confirm what that meant, but the phrase structural readings was enough to ignite speculation. If Psyche had detected structure, geometry, alignment, or regular patterning, it would suggest artificiality. By mid-November, the blackout had evolved from mystery to scandal. A group of astronomers launched an open petition demanding NASA release the missing datasets. The agency declined, citing ongoing validation. In bureaucratic language, that meant indefinitely postponed. And while NASA maintained silence, another anomaly appeared, this time in the ESA network. On November 18th, the ExoMars TGO mission logged a burst of encrypted transmissions routed through a US relay satellite, not its usual European link. The data packet size matched that of a full observational sequence. Within hours, the entry was removed from public view. Whatever had been collected, by Psyche or TGO, was being routed somewhere off the official grid. Researchers began assembling what they called the Timeline Gap Report. It detailed every overlapping event. August 25, 3I Atlas's sunward jet first observed. September 1 to 5, Psyche blackout and data rerouting. September 6, ESA data schedule stamped 2099. October 1, U.S. government shutdown begins. October 4 to 6, Radio silence from all deep space tracking networks. Individually, each event was explainable. Together, they formed a sequence, a rhythm of concealment. It was as if, once 3I Atlas entered observation range, the world's space infrastructure had developed a reflex to look away. Even within NASA, quiet dissent grew. An engineer, speaking to Scientific American on Background, said, "You can't hide a comet, you can only hide its story." The timeline gap had become that story, the missing heartbeat in a year that was supposed to redefine interstellar exploration. But what made it more unsettling was what came next, the first unofficial leak. On December 2nd, a compressed file labeled ATLAS_0903.tar appeared briefly on a dark data mirror used by independent astrophysicists. It vanished within hours, replaced with a government takedown notice. No one could confirm its contents, but a few who claimed to have downloaded it described the same thing, a single grayscale frame. Not a comet, not a rock. A shape, cylindrical, smooth, with a sharp terminus and faint heat signatures along its sunward edge. If genuine, it was the first image of 3I Atlas that had ever escaped the blackout. And if that image was real, the question shifted from what went missing to who decided we shouldn't see it. Part 6. The leak. The leak arrived like a rumor, but it spread like a revelation. On the night of December 2nd, 2025, a file appeared on a small, password-protected astrophysics server hosted out of Reykjavik, Iceland. The site was used mainly by amateur radio astronomers and university students exchanging raw sky data. But this time, the upload wasn't a telescope log or a spectrograph file. It was something far more explosive. The file name was atlas_core0903.tar. September 3rd, 2025, the second day of Psyche's blackout. At first, few noticed. The file was only 84 megabytes, too small to be a full image sequence. It sat unnoticed for nearly an hour before a graduate student at the University of Padua, cross-checking new uploads for a research project, opened it. Inside was a single, uncompressed frame in raw 16-bit grayscale. The metadata matched NASA's Psyche imaging system perfectly. Camera ID, lens calibration, focus parameters, all authentic. Even the embedded checksum corresponded to NASA's official encryption pattern. Whoever had uploaded it either worked inside the data pipeline or had direct access to an internal terminal. And the image, it didn't look like anything anyone expected from a comet. At first glance, it was unremarkable, just a bright crescent against a dark background, framed by sensor noise. But when brightness levels were adjusted, the shape emerged. It was long, metallic, and unnervingly precise. A cylindrical body, narrowing at one end, with faint lines along its surface that looked too evenly spaced to be natural. The reflective albedo, roughly 0.47, was higher than any known comet nucleus, and the thermal readings embedded in the pixel data showed concentrated heat at the nose of the object, the side facing the sun. It wasn't ice vaporizing, it was emission. Within hours, the image spread across private astrophysics forums. Users debated its authenticity, comparing it to Psyche's optical configurations. Several confirmed that the lens distortion and signal noise matched the spacecraft's known parameters. Even the timestamp encoded in binary hex 2025-09-03 T174208Z fit the precise window of the blackout. By morning, the leak had escaped containment. Screenshots circulated on encrypted social channels, where users began calling it the I-frame. Someone zoomed in and claimed to see a tri-lobed pattern near the object's center, 3 darker circular regions aligned like pupils. It was that observation that birthed the name 3I Atlas. NASA's response was swift and conspicuously legalistic. The agency issued a formal notice invoking the Federal Information Security Modernization Act, claiming the image contained sensitive mission data under restricted analysis. The file was removed from every major mirror within hours. But the takedown only amplified suspicion. If the image were fake, why remove it? Soon after, digital forensics experts from universities in Japan and Canada independently verified that the checksum hash in the file header matched NASA's own proprietary encoding format. In other words, the file wasn't fabricated. It originated from inside the Psyche data system. For a week, chaos followed. Major science outlets treaded carefully, refusing to publish the image outright but acknowledging its existence. Scientific American called it a possibly authentic but unexplained leak. Le Monde described it as an unprecedented data security breach in deep space research. And on Reddit and X, the speculation went nuclear. Some argued that the object was a fragment of a metallic asteroid, perhaps an iron core exposed by erosion. Others believed it to be a probe, an artifact, or worse, evidence of an engineered visitor. Then, on December 8th, something even more remarkable happened. The original Reykjavik server administrator released a statement claiming the file had not been uploaded by any registered user. The account credentials had been created 5 minutes before the upload and deleted 5 minutes after. The IP address traced to a NASA subnet, but one that was inactive since 2022. It was as if the file had been uploaded by a ghost system. That revelation shifted the debate from what is the object to who wanted us to see it. A few within NASA quietly suggested an internal whistleblower. Someone troubled by the blackout, trying to leak the truth. But others proposed something stranger, that the upload had been automated, triggered by a backup routine designed to push data to a secondary public node if files were withheld too long. NASA, for its part, denied that such a system existed, but the idea had power. If true, it meant Psyche's own software, not a human, had made the choice to reveal the frame. The scientific community fractured overnight. A minority called for restraint, urging peer verification and caution, but the majority, especially independent astronomers, demanded answers. Open letters to NASA's Data Management Board flooded in, signed by hundreds of academics. None received replies. Meanwhile, the iframe continued to circulate. Enhanced versions revealed faint trails of plasma along the object's sunward edge, forming a filament pattern eerily similar to controlled exhaust plumes. One analysis by an astrophysicist at Kyoto University concluded that the observed radiation resembles sustained thrust rather than passive heating. If accurate, that single line rewrote everything. Because thrust implies control, and control implies intent. Suddenly, the debate over interstellar visitors was no longer philosophical, it was operational. By mid-December, several online sleuths traced the object's trajectory and found that after September 6th, 3I Atlas had made a minute but measurable course correction, an alteration of less than 0.003 degrees. But in interstellar terms, that deviation was impossible to ignore. Something had adjusted its path. NASA never commented on the anomaly. The European Space Agency didn't either. But on December 15th, a single cryptic tweet appeared from a now-deleted account claiming to be a NASA contractor. The eye isn't gone. It's waiting where the light is strongest. The message vanished within minutes. And so, too, did the conversation. For the rest of December, no agency, no official, no scientist of standing spoke the name 3I Atlas. But in private, Across encrypted academic channels and dimly lit observatory control rooms, one shared fear began to take hold. What if the object wasn't leaving at all? What if it was stopping? Part 7. The Stationary Object. When an interstellar object passes through the solar system, its behavior is predictable. Gravity pulls, light pushes, and the object follows a clear curve. In, around, and out. That's orbital mechanics 101. Every known comet, asteroid, or icy traveler follows that rule. They accelerate as they approach the sun and slow as they retreat. Simple, elegant, inescapable. 3i Atlas did not. By mid-December 2025, tracking networks in South America and Australia began to notice something impossible. The object wasn't accelerating away. It wasn't decelerating either. It was steady. Its radial velocity had plateaued, neither increasing nor decreasing. In other words, 3i Atlas appeared to have stopped. At first, it seemed like a measurement error. Data from small observatories often contain timing noise or calibration drift. But when NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory cross-checked the numbers with radar telemetry from Goldstone, the results were the same. The Doppler shift from the object's reflected signal had stabilized. The inference was unambiguous. Its velocity relative to the sun had frozen at approximately 46.2 kilometers per second. To stop at that speed against solar gravity would require unimaginable energy. No natural process could do that. The discovery wasn't made public, not officially. It emerged through whispers, private emails between observatories, and fragments of orbital elements quietly shared in closed scientific Slack channels. But as more teams confirmed the same reading, disbelief turned into something else: dread. One astronomer in Chile, who spoke under anonymity, put it bluntly: "We've never seen a comet stop before, and if it did, it stopped on purpose." By the third week of December, a pattern emerged. 3i Atlas had taken a stable position roughly 0.78 astronomical units from the Sun, just inside Earth's orbit. Its coordinates placed it near the L4 point of the Earth-Sun system, a region where gravitational forces balance. It was, effectively, parking itself in one of the solar system's equilibrium zones. This was no trajectory. This was positioning. The discovery triggered quiet panic among the agencies still monitoring it. ESA's Mission Operations Center in Darmstadt reclassified 3i Atlas from interstellar object to unidentified solar system body. NASA didn't echo the change, but internal memos revealed a new designation code: Object X17A, tagged under Active Observation Suspension. That last phrase, Active Observation Suspension, was unprecedented. It meant, in bureaucratic shorthand, do not engage, do not pursue. But why would anyone avoid studying something this extraordinary? The official reasoning, buried in the memo's fine print, cited unverified dynamic behavior inconsistent with expected orbital parameters. In simpler words, it wasn't behaving like physics said it should. Meanwhile, ground-based observatories in Spain and Namibia continued to track the object's light curve. What they saw deepened the mystery. The sunward jet, the same anomalous plume that had once pointed into the sunlight, was gone, replaced by something subtler, stranger, a pulsing halo, rhythmic and consistent, with a cycle of precisely 91 minutes. Each pulse lasted around 12 seconds, fluctuating in brightness by exactly 0.06 magnitudes. The regularity of the pattern made natural explanations unlikely. Objects spin, yes, they tumble, they flicker, but not like this, not with a heartbeat. Some called it the beacon. Others avoided naming it at all. When the data reached radio astronomers at Arecibo's successor array in Puerto Rico, they turned their antennas toward the coordinates and listened. Nothing. No narrowband signals, no modulated transmissions, just a faint broadband hiss, thermal noise, or maybe cosmic background radiation. But as the telescope logged its output, analysts noticed something eerie. Each time the optical pulse brightened, the radio noise dipped slightly, as if the object were absorbing energy at precise intervals. It wasn't transmitting, it was synchronizing. By January 2026, the evidence was overwhelming. 3I Atlas was no longer moving like a rock. It was acting like a probe, stationary, modulating, and seemingly aware of its environment. NASA and ESA held an emergency joint session under the pretense of coordinated planetary monitoring. No transcript was ever released. But two attendees later confirmed that the central topic was X-17A. The conclusion of that meeting was clear: cease public commentary, reroute all high-resolution tracking data to private servers, and discontinue routine sky notifications. The silence deepened. Even amateur observers began to notice something off, not about the object itself, but about its visibility. Skywatching software that once displayed 3I Atlas's predicted position suddenly stopped updating. The coordinates vanished from online databases. Orbital elements that had been freely available on NASA's Minor Planet Center page were replaced with marks. For the first time in modern astronomy, an object visible from Earth had been quietly removed from the record. Officially, there was no explanation. Unofficially, one theory spread among those still whispering about it, that 3I Atlas was no longer just reflecting light. It was controlling it. The periodic dimming patterns hinted at active modulation, energy management, thermal shielding, maybe even some form of optical camouflage. If that was true, it wasn't just parked near Earth's orbit, it was watching from there. Across research institutions, debate turned philosophical. Was this evidence of technology or of a natural process so far beyond our understanding that it might as well be? Dr. Lila Warovec of the Czech Academy of Sciences wrote in her private journal, later leaked, "If it's natural, it's the most unnatural thing nature has ever done. If it's artificial, we're already late to realize who built it." And then, at the start of February 2026, the pulses stopped, completely. For 18 days, 3I Atlas became inert. No light curve, no jet, no motion. A perfect, motionless object suspended in space, absorbing sunlight without response. When it flickered back to life on February 20th, something had changed. Its reflectivity had dropped by nearly half, and the faint outline of its cylindrical form had turned, slightly, toward Earth. It hadn't just stopped moving, it had reoriented. Part 8. The rotation toward Earth. At first, no one wanted to believe it. The orientation shift was subtle, almost imperceptible, just a few degrees of rotation recorded by optical telescopes in Chile and South Africa. But over the following weeks, the pattern held. 3I Atlas was no longer facing the sun. It was turning, slowly, deliberately, toward Earth. The first confirmation came from the European Southern Observatory's VLT in Paranal. On February 22, 2026, Dr. Javier Montes logged a faint asymmetry in the object's thermal profile. The hotspot that had always faced the sun, the source of its anomalous emissions, had migrated slightly off-axis. Within 48 hours, Japan's Subaru telescope confirmed the same shift. By February 25th, independent radar arrays in Ukraine and Australia verified the change. The object's long axis was now aligned within 0.6 degrees toward Earth's orbital plane. At that distance, nearly 117 million kilometers, it was still far beyond the moon's reach. But the implication was impossible to ignore. The object wasn't passively floating anymore. It was looking. NASA, predictably, said nothing. But inside the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, a memo circulated with a new classification, X17A, Earth-Referenced Orientation Detected. Underneath that, a single line in red text, pending cross-agency verification. The silence returned, but outside the agencies, the world was beginning to notice. Amateur astronomers, relying on archived orbital elements and backyard telescopes, began reporting a stationary glint in the early morning sky. It wasn't visible to the naked eye, but long-exposure photos taken between February 26th and March 1st showed a consistent, faint reflection at the coordinates NASA had quietly deleted from its public database. Social media lit up. The hashtag #AtlasEye began trending across scientific circles. Dozens of posts compared the reflection patterns, claiming to see a pulsing rhythm every 90 minutes, echoing the earlier optical heartbeat that had gone silent weeks before. Then, as if responding to attention, the object pulsed again. At 3:14 UTC on March 2nd, telescopes in Hawaii and Chile both recorded a synchronized burst of light, lasting 12 seconds, directly aligned with Earth's terminator line, the boundary between day and night. The alignment wasn't coincidence. The pulse occurred precisely when Earth's rotation placed the continental United States in the center of the illuminated hemisphere. Whatever was happening, it was targeted. For the next 48 hours, the pulses repeated, every 91 minutes, 12 seconds long, each slightly brighter than the last. At their peak, they were visible even to small amateur telescopes, and then, abruptly, on March 4th, they stopped again. The effect on the scientific community was electric. For decades, astronomers had dreamed of detecting a signal, any signal, originating beyond Earth. Yet here was something more ambiguous, more unnerving, not a transmission, but a pattern, a gesture. If it was communication, it wasn't in any language we understood. The US government's first internal report on the phenomenon, later leaked, categorized the event not as an astronomical observation, but as a non-terrestrial sensor interaction. The classification alone, non-terrestrial, was enough to send ripples through the global research network. In Europe, the ESA issued a brief, cryptic statement. We are aware of recent unverified optical fluctuations associated with object X17A. The data are under review and currently inconclusive. But privately, within ESA's data management division, an engineer leaked something far more disturbing. The object's spectral response to the pulses included narrowband absorption lines that matched precisely the same frequency range used by deep space radar and communications arrays, 8.4 gigahertz. In other words, Three-Eyed Atlas was not just reflecting sunlight, it was interacting with Earth's radar frequencies. It was listening. Across global observatories, engineers began conducting radar pings, brief coded transmissions aimed at the object to measure range and reflectivity. Most went unanswered. But a few noticed something extraordinary. Tiny phase shifts, milliseconds long, embedded in the radar echo, as if the signal had been slightly modulated before returning. One physicist compared it to sonar bouncing off an intelligent dolphin. You send out a ping, and something out there changes it, just enough to say, I heard you. By mid-March, the phrase, the response, had entered the vocabulary of scientists following the case. It wasn't a message, not in the traditional sense, but it was undeniably deliberate. The echo variations repeated with the same timing as the optical pulses. For the first time, humanity wasn't just looking at the stars, it was being looked at back. In Washington, an emergency session of the National Science Advisory Committee convened on March 9th under the codename Project Aurora. The session's minutes, partially declassified months later, described a single topic: assessing whether object X17A posed an active or passive observational threat. At the same time, China's National Space Administration quietly shifted 2 of its Yaogan satellites into high-inclination orbits, positions ideal for monitoring the object's new trajectory. Russia's Roscosmos redirected its Spectre-RG telescope to conduct spectral analysis, though no public results were ever released. The world's silence was no longer coordinated ignorance, it was coordinated attention. And yet, through all the secrecy, one simple, haunting fact remained. The pulses, the alignments, the reflections, they all pointed toward a single vector, Earth's North Pole. When the data from the last March 4th pulse was decoded by a group of independent analysts in Finland, they noticed something chilling. The 12-second pattern wasn't random. It encoded a repeating numerical ratio, 365.25 to 1, the orbital period of Earth, 1 year. The object wasn't broadcasting, it was mirroring our motion. And as one of the Finnish astronomers wrote in her report, it's not signaling us, it's synchronizing with us. That was when 3I Atlas stopped being a mystery of astronomy and became a question of intent. Because if something across 117 million kilometers could track our rotation, orbit, and radio signatures with such precision, the next question wasn't how it could see us, it was why. Part 9. The Global Quiet. By late March 2026, the story that had started as a whisper among amateur astronomers was now a silent emergency behind closed doors. The object known as 3I Atlas, now officially designated X17A, had done the impossible. It had stopped, turned, and synchronized with Earth. Yet somehow, the world's most connected civilization fell eerily quiet. No public press conference, no televised briefing. No comment from NASA, ESA, JAXA, Roscosmos, or CNSA. The silence was absolute. For a few days, journalists tried to force the story into the open. Independent science reporters filed Freedom of Information requests for any mention of X17A or object lock. Each request was denied under identical wording. Records, if they exist, pertain to matters of national security. National security. The phrase landed like a hammer. Even in the Cold War, when space discoveries often brushed against defense priorities, comets and asteroids had never been classified as security threats. The term was a legal wall, one that could bury information for decades. Behind that wall, a strange and coordinated global stillness took shape. Radio telescopes that had been pointed at the object were suddenly retasked for atmospheric studies. Tracking data from the Deep Space Network began returning generic logs, identical files repeating day after day, like a frozen feed. Amateur astronomers found that NASA's JPL Horizon system, once a public tool for orbital predictions, no longer accepted X17A as a valid query. The message on screen simply read, "No such body in current catalog." The world's databases had erased it. The blackout wasn't limited to the West. In China, an astronomy student at the University of Science and Technology of Hefei posted an internal screenshot showing that Yaogan 38, a reconnaissance satellite, had reoriented toward the same coordinates. The post vanished within an hour, and the student's account was suspended. In Russia, fragments of leaked telemetry from the Spectre-RG telescope confirmed the object's continued presence, but were quickly taken offline by Roscosmos administrators. For those still tracking the phenomenon unofficially, a pattern emerged. Each time new data surfaced, a wave of censorship followed within hours. Someone, or something, was enforcing a coordinated silence across agencies that rarely agreed on anything. And yet, silence is never total. Small observatories and radio amateurs, still listening on the fringes, began noticing a subtle, shared anomaly: background noise. The faint hum of cosmic radiation that fills every receiver was changing, flattening. Between 8 and 9 gigahertz, the band where Earth's deep space communications operate, the static seemed to fade, replaced by an almost mathematical uniformity. It was as if the noise itself were being canceled. At first, it seemed technical. Maybe atmospheric interference, maybe calibration drift. But as reports accumulated from telescopes in Japan, Chile, Finland, and South Africa, it became clear the change wasn't local, it was global. The universe, or at least the part of it we could hear, was growing quiet. By April, astrophysicists in Europe began referring to it privately as the noise floor collapse, a strange reduction in ambient radio fluctuation coinciding perfectly with the period during which 3I Atlas faced Earth. In an internal memo later leaked to the Financial Times, a senior engineer at ESA wrote, "We may be inside a signal damping field, whether intentional or incidental." The object could be filtering space noise, perhaps scanning through it, perhaps masking itself. We do not know which is worse. The line between fear and awe blurred. In early April, a handful of scientists broke ranks. Un astrophysicien, Dr Armand Leduc, apparut anonymement sur un podcast pour dire ce que tout le monde pensait mais Nono voulait admettre publiquement. We are not watching a comet, we are being observed by an instrument. And the silence is not theirs, it's ours. 2 days later, Dr. Leduc's academic profile vanished from the Sorbonne's website. Meanwhile, civilian technology began to notice subtle effects. Telecommunications companies reported inexplicable interference across deep space relay frequencies. Not disruptions, absences. Whole channels of noise gone, like someone had drone them out of the spectrum. The effect was strongest during Earth's daylight hours, leading some to suggest that the damping was synchronized to solar illumination. The public explanation, when it came, was almost farcical. NASA's official X-band communications bulletin described the global signal reduction as temporary quiet sun activity. But solar physicists immediately objected. The sun had been unusually active, not quiet. X-class flares had erupted twice that month. The explanation made no sense. What did make sense, at least to those few who still compared data in private, was the correlation. Each time the background noise dipped, 3I Atlas brightened, ever so slightly, as though absorbing the energy of silence itself. By late April, the world's instruments were blind. The global radio floor, the hiss that forms the backdrop to all cosmic listening, was now almost perfectly uniform. It wasn't just quiet, it was empty. For the first time since the dawn of radio astronomy, the universe itself seemed to stop whispering. And then, the pulse returned. At exactly 0000 UTC, on the first day of May 2026, 3I Atlas emitted a single 12-second burst, brighter than any it had produced before. Telescopes from Chile to Japan recorded it simultaneously. But this time, the pulse wasn't aimed along Earth's orbit. It was aimed at the planet itself. Satellites in geosynchronous orbit registered a cascading flash, faint but measurable, reflecting off Earth's upper atmosphere. No damage, no disruption, just illumination. The pulse carried no signal, no code, no modulation that anyone could detect. It was light and nothing more. But its timing, midnight, universal, was precise to the millisecond. Every clock on Earth ticked through the moment together. And then the hum returned, louder than before. The universe was speaking again. But for the first time in human history, we weren't sure if it was speaking to us or through us. Part 10. Echoes of the Signal. The pulse of May 1st, 2026 was unlike anything Earth had ever recorded. For 12 seconds, every major observatory, from Mauna Kea to the Atacama Plateau, saw the same thing: a flash of light not from the sun, not from any known satellite, but from a single fixed point, 117 million kilometers away. It wasn't just visible light. Radio telescopes across the globe detected a simultaneous broadband surge spanning from 1.3 to 10 gigahertz. The spike was uniform, harmonic, almost too clean. It contained no obvious modulation, no encoded data. Yet, when researchers overlaid the signal with Earth's own transmission history, they discovered something eerie. The waveform wasn't random. It was an echo. The May 1st burst matched, bit for bit, the background noise Earth had transmitted into space over the previous 50 years. Old television signals, radar pings, satellite telemetry, even fragments of Apollo-era broadcasts. Compressed, distorted, rearranged, but there. Our own voice reflected back from something that shouldn't be capable of remembering. At first, the effect was dismissed as coincidence, but the deeper analysts dug, the more precise it became. Embedded within the frequency stack were patterns of spectral intensity that corresponded exactly to Earth's historical transmission cycles. A faint spike at 2.4 gigahertz, the Wi-Fi band, mirrored global internet density. Echoes of UHF television carriers appeared as low-frequency harmonics. Even the precise timing of Cold War radar sweeps, long since shut down, re-emerged as faint rhythmic beats in the background noise. Someone, or something, had listened to half a century of human radio noise, reconstructed it, and sent it back in perfect synchronization. NASA refused to acknowledge the correlation publicly, but internally, the agency's Data Systems Group labeled the phenomenon Signal Reflection Class 4. In the same document, one line stood out. The content of the return transmission demonstrates non-random phase alignment consistent with directed re-emission. Directed re-emission. It wasn't a reflection at all. It was playback. The implications were staggering. If 3i Atlas was retransmitting our own electromagnetic history, then it had been listening long before it was discovered. The object's trajectory, when extrapolated backward, suggested it had entered the solar system's outer edge around 2014, 11 years before anyone noticed. It had been here the whole time, silently collecting the echoes of our civilization. Then, in May 2026, it chose to speak. Across the world, scientists scrambled to decode possible messages within the noise. The SETI Institute ran deep correlation algorithms on the returned waveform, searching for hidden phase patterns, prime number sequences, or amplitude modulations. None appeared. It wasn't a message in the linguistic sense. It was something far stranger. A mirror made of time. One astrophysicist described it as hearing your own voice, recorded from miles away, delayed by the speed of light. But even that metaphor failed to capture the scope. The playback wasn't local, it was global. Every frequency humanity had ever filled the sky with, radio, radar, television, microwave, was being replayed simultaneously from a single point in space. It was as though the planet itself had been placed in front of a cosmic speaker, hearing its own echo for the first time. The first to notice the emotional content of the playback were linguists, not physicists. Within the chaos of noise, certain power peaks stood out, short bursts that coincided with moments of human triumph and catastrophe. Apollo transmissions, the fall of the Berlin Wall. The first cell phone call, the Challenger explosion, 9/11, all encoded, unintentionally, in our electromagnetic output. Now, all of it was coming back, layered, compressed, folded together. The object wasn't just reflecting our signal, it was curating it. And then the real anomaly began. Within hours of the burst, shortwave radio operators across the world reported faint rhythmic interference patterns, pulses that didn't originate from any known transmitter. The pulses followed the same 12-second cycle as 3I Atlas's light emissions, but each was slightly delayed by exactly 8 minutes and 19 seconds. That delay was the time it takes for light to travel from the sun to Earth. In other words, whatever the object was doing, it was using the sun as a relay. ESA's Solar and Heliospheric Observatory, SOHO, confirmed that solar wind density spiked slightly with each pulse, an electromagnetic ripple passing through the heliosphere itself. The sun wasn't emitting the signal, but it was being used by it, like a carrier. The revelation sent shockwaves through the scientific community. If 3I Atlas could manipulate solar plasma to carry its playback, then it was operating at an energy scale beyond anything humanity could conceive. NASA's classified report, later leaked, stated bluntly, Object X-17A demonstrates apparent modulation of heliospheric plasma consistent with high-order energy redirection. The sun has become part of its communication medium. In other words, the object wasn't just in the solar system, it was using it. The global response was schizophrenic. Governments stayed silent. Religious leaders spoke of revelation. Stock markets fluctuated violently for a week. And in the background, across thousands of servers, data analysts kept trying to find meaning in the returning static. Then, on May 3rd, at 03:14 UTC, the same timestamp as the earlier pulses, something new appeared in the waveform. Hidden between overlapping layers of historical noise was a single repeating pattern of 3 tones, separated by exactly 1.618 seconds, the golden ratio. 3 tones, 3 intervals. 3I Atlas. No one knew whether it was a name, a signature, or something else entirely, but it was the first element of the signal that could not have been generated accidentally. It wasn't an echo anymore. It was a reply. Part 11. The reply. When the pattern of 3 tones first appeared, many dismissed it as coincidence. Space is noisy, random, infinite in its capacity to deceive pattern-seeking minds. But this wasn't random. It repeated precisely, every 91 minutes, in perfect harmony with the object's rotation and the earlier optical pulses. The golden ratio timing, 1.618 seconds between tones, was too deliberate, too elegant. It wasn't a message that demanded understanding. It was one that declared awareness. For the first 12 hours after detection, SETI's network of observatories focused every available dish toward 3I Atlas. The Allen Telescope Array in California recorded the signal 47 times in succession. Each instance was identical. No variation in tone, no drift, no degradation. A perfect mathematical rhythm. At first, they thought it might be a beacon, an interstellar form of I am here. But then, during the 48th cycle, the sequence changed. It didn't broadcast 3 tones anymore. It broadcast 4. The first 3 were the same. The 4th was lower, by exactly 1 semitone. A change that carried no obvious meaning, yet altered the rhythm in a way that felt responsive. The SETI team tested a hypothesis. They transmitted a brief pulse back, matching the object's 1.618 second interval, using an encoded binary signal that simply read ACK, the digital equivalent of "We hear you." For 90 minutes, nothing happened. Then, precisely on the next rotation, 3I Atlas responded, not with light, not with silence. The 3-tone sequence stopped altogether for 1 full cycle. Every dish on Earth, Allen, Parks, Meerkat, Fast, confirmed it. The object had noticed our reply and paused. And then, in the 50th transmission, the tones resumed. But this time, the fourth note rose by a semitone, back to its original frequency. A call. A pause. A response. It was the first two-way exchange humanity had ever experienced with something not of Earth. NASA's internal report labeled it Non-Random Reciprocal Pattern, Event NRRP 50. The file was immediately restricted to Level 6 clearance, normally reserved for defense communications. Even the scientists who had first recorded the event were locked out of their own data. By May 5th, 3I Atlas's emissions had stabilized into a repeating structure. 3 ascending tones, 1 descending, followed by a pause of 12 seconds. But this time, the pause wasn't empty. When magnified at high resolution, faint micro-modulations appeared, too weak to be audible, but clearly structured. Mathematicians ran autocorrelation analyses, linguists ran phonetic mappings, cryptographers searched for cipher symmetry. What they found wasn't language in any conventional sense, but it wasn't noise either. It was geometry. Each micromodulation plotted on a time-frequency graph formed repeating spiral patterns, Fibonacci spirals, each proportional to the next by the same golden ratio. The signal wasn't saying something. It was showing something. The pattern, when reconstructed in 3 dimensions, resembled an expanding vortex, like a tunnel or cone, oriented inward, not outward. To anyone who saw it, the symbolism was inescapable, an eye. 3 spiraling forms converging toward a single focal point. 3 eyes, 1 focus. That phrase began circulating among researchers locked inside the classified review teams. Then came the twist. At 1912 UTC on May 7th, the tones stopped mid-sequence. For the first time since its reawakening, 3I Atlas fell completely silent. But the moment it did, instruments across Earth registered something extraordinary, a faint, low-frequency tremor in the planet's own magnetic field. The Schumann resonances, the natural electromagnetic frequencies of Earth's atmosphere, shifted by 0.01 Hz, small but measurable. The change lasted exactly 12 seconds. In other words, when the object went silent, Earth echoed back. The implication was staggering. The signal wasn't just traveling through vacuum. It was interacting with our planet directly, through the magnetosphere, through the ionosphere, perhaps even deeper. To some, it was evidence of communication. To others, invasion. Within hours, militaries worldwide elevated alert statuses quietly but unmistakably. The U.S. Space Command's Orbital Surveillance Network issued a silent directive: continuous optical monitoring of X-17A, do not engage. China's CNSA began restricting high-band radar activity. Even private companies like SpaceX received encrypted advisories warning of electromagnetic interference zones. The world had officially entered the era of contact management. In secret rooms, teams debated how to respond. Should humanity speak again? Should we stay silent? What if the tones weren't a greeting? Then, without warning, the signal resumed. Different this time. No tones, no spirals, just one long, continuous hum. At first, the hum seemed like static, but when analysts slowed it down and filtered it through waveform isolation, they found an embedded pulse train, binary pairs. It wasn't random binary, though. The spacing between pulses matched a prime number sequence: 2, 3, 5, 7, 11. It was the oldest universal code in mathematics, a signature of intelligence. But halfway through the sequence, something broke the pattern. A sudden drop, a pause. Then a second sequence, longer, more complex, one that began with 2, 3, 5, and then 8, 13, 21, the Fibonacci sequence. The ratio of 1.618 returned again. The same number in the timing of the tones, the same ratio in the geometry of the spirals. The same pattern that defines the structure of galaxies, flowers, and shells. To some, it was mathematics. To others, it was philosophy. To a few, it was invitation. SETI scientists, working off record, began referring to the pattern as the return ratio. It seemed to bridge pure number and organic design, a way to say, we understand the same symmetry you do. And then, the last message came. On May 9th, at 000 UTC, 3I Atlas transmitted one final signal, 12 seconds long, just like the others, but instead of tones or numbers, it was a pure, steady light. Within that light, encoded in polarized frequencies, analysts detected one final data frame, a single image. Not a map, not a word, not a code, a spiral. Not expanding outward, collapsing inward, into itself. When decoded in color space, the spiral wasn't abstract anymore. It was familiar. It was the precise magnetic topography of Earth's North Pole, and at its center, faint but undeniable, was a small dark circle. An eye, watching. Part 12. The Disclosure. By the morning of May 10, 2026, 3I Atlas had gone silent again. No tones, no pulses, no radio reflection, nothing. Yet the world was no longer the same. In every scientific institution on Earth, the same question reverberated in hushed corridors and encrypted messages. What now? The signals had been real. The patterns, golden ratio, prime sequences, Fibonacci spirals, weren't artifacts. The playback of our own transmissions had been confirmed by over a dozen independent observatories. The object's final act, projecting Earth's magnetic field centered on a single eye, was recorded by telescopes across 3 continents. For a brief electric moment in human history, there was no longer any doubt that something beyond Earth had noticed us. And then, suddenly, every government on the planet seemed to reach the same decision: say nothing. On May 12th, NASA's Director of Planetary Science, Dr. Eleanor Graves, gave the agency's first and last statement on the event. Her voice was calm, carefully measured. The object known as 2025 X17A remains under observation. At this time, no credible evidence suggests it exhibits artificial characteristics. NASA will continue to monitor the situation alongside international partners. It was a masterclass in denial. Every phrase was technically true, yet deliberately hollow. No mention of the pulses. No mention of the radio echoes. No mention of the 12-second synchronization with Earth's magnetic field. ESA's public bulletin followed the same template: calm, dismissive, evasive. Data irregularities are consistent with instrument cross-modulation. The object's behavior remains within expected astrophysical norms. Except, of course, it wasn't. Behind those statements, private communication channels told a different story. The leaked logs of Project Aurora, the joint US-EU task force overseeing analysis of 3I Atlas, revealed that as of May 10th, the object had ceased transmitting entirely, but was still active. Its infrared signature showed residual thermal cycling every 91 minutes, the same interval as its earlier pulse rhythm. It was as if it were still breathing. The task force's final line item, marked classified/cosmic, read, "If autonomous, X-17A demonstrates persistent awareness of solar and terrestrial alignment. Recommend continued passive observation. No active engagement. No active engagement." That phrase would become the policy of an entire planet. For months afterward, scientists who had been part of the investigation were reassigned, some to asteroid monitoring programs, others to atmospheric studies. The deeper they had been involved in X-17A, the further from deep space research they were moved. Meanwhile, the story quietly evaporated from public view. Search engines adjusted their algorithms. News articles lost visibility. The viral hashtags, AtlasI, #SignalReturn, stopped appearing in feeds. To the average person, 3I Atlas had simply been another comet that faded into the dark. But not everyone forgot. A small network of independent astronomers, the same ones who had first noticed the missing days of Psyche's data months earlier, refused to let it go. They kept tracking. They built their own predictive models. And sometime in August 2026, one of them, a radio engineer in Finland, noticed something extraordinary. The background noise was back. The noise floor collapse that had silenced the universe was slowly reversing. Random static returned to the 8-9 GHz range. The cosmos was speaking again. But hidden in the returning chaos, he found a pattern, one that repeated every 365.25 days, the orbital period of Earth. It wasn't a transmission, but a countdown. At first, the interpretation was dismissed as paranoia. But when he overlaid the cycle onto X-17A's last known trajectory, the alignment was exact. The object's projected motion suggested it would re-enter observational range on May 1st, 2027, exactly 1 year after the global pulse. The implication was impossible to ignore. It hadn't left. It had only retreated, waiting for Earth to complete one more orbit, waiting for the next alignment. Meanwhile, subtle anomalies began to appear in unrelated datasets. Magnetometers detected faint periodic fluctuations, synchronized to the same 12-second rhythm that once defined the object's pulses. Deep space antennas picked up repeating microbursts at the edge of sensitivity, echoing the golden ratio timing. Every sign pointed to one conclusion. Whatever 3I Atlas was, it was preparing to resume. And yet, the world still pretended it wasn't happening. In classrooms, students learned about comets and planets as if 2025-2026 had been an ordinary year. News cycles churned on politics, economics, climate, and conflict. Humanity, once more, returned to its familiar blindness. But not everyone could forget the sound, the three tones, the pause, the hum that had made the world's atmosphere tremble. Among the few who still tracked the data, one question kept resurfacing. If the object was mirroring us, responding to our transmissions, curating our own electromagnetic history, then what would it play back next? Because in the language of symmetry, every echo has a second half. And in that symmetry lies a terrifying possibility, that what 3I Atlas sent us was never a message from the stars, but a rehearsal, a prelude, an introduction, the silence before the second signal. Part 13, the second alignment. In the early months of 2027, Earth seemed to move beneath a sky that no longer trusted itself. The silence of the previous year, cold, measured, bureaucratic, hung over the world's scientific community like fog. Officially, 3I Atlas had been classified as a transient interstellar anomaly. Unofficially, it had become the thing every scientist studied but no one spoke of. By January, the signs began to return. Small radio observatories in the southern hemisphere, many of them privately owned, started detecting faint rhythmic noise, spaced exactly 1.618 seconds apart. The amplitude was weak, almost ghost-like, but unmistakably artificial. The signal wasn't coming from deep space anymore. It was emanating from somewhere along Earth's orbit, almost parallel to the Sun-Earth line. The first to confirm it publicly was a Chilean astronomer named Dr. Carla Vicuña. Her team at Cerro Tololo had kept their antennas on the same coordinates where 3I Atlas had last been seen, simply out of stubborn curiosity. When the golden ratio rhythm reappeared in February, they knew it wasn't random. It was punctual, right on schedule. May 1st, 2027, the one-year mark was approaching. NASA, ESA, and Roscosmos all denied new activity. But internal memos, later leaked, showed otherwise. Ground-based tracking stations had already reacquired X-17A as early as April 17th. Its infrared signature was faint but consistent, located again near Earth's orbital path, at almost the same distance as before, 0.78 AU. And this time, it wasn't stationary. It was moving in tandem with Earth's orbit, maintaining the same relative position as our planet revolved around the Sun. The term the analysts used was chilling, co-orbital synchronization. It wasn't traveling through the solar system anymore. It was with us. The public still knew nothing. Official star catalogs made no mention of any new object. But amateur astronomers began noticing strange residual light near the Sun's limb at dawn and dusk, a faint glimmer that appeared, then vanished, in patterns too regular to coincidence. Then, on April 30th, one day before the anniversary of the first pulse, the golden ratio tones returned, louder than ever. 3 rising notes, a pause, then a single descending tone. For 12 seconds, the pattern repeated across every major radio frequency, saturating bands used by satellites, military radar, even civilian Wi-Fi. It wasn't localized. It was everywhere at once, blanketing the planet in a perfectly timed hum. Governments scrambled to contain the disruption. Communications faltered. GPS signals flickered. Stock exchanges froze for 12 seconds, the same duration as the pulse. Air traffic control systems logged phantom radar blips across both hemispheres, then returned to normal as if nothing had happened. It was as though the entire technological infrastructure of Earth had been pinged. At 000 UTC, May 1st, 2027, exactly 1 year to the second since the first global illumination, the light returned. But this time, it didn't come from 117 million kilometers away. It came from Earth's shadow side. Satellites orbiting in geosynchronous position recorded a bloom of reflected light behind the planet, a bright crescent that shouldn't have existed. The geometry was impossible. Whatever had been at 0.78 AU had moved inward, aligning perfectly with Earth's orbit. For 20 seconds, the shadow lit up like dawn, seen from the wrong direction. Every telescope that turned toward it recorded the same shape. Not a sphere, not a comet. A column of light, vertical, narrow, like a pillar of energy extending outward into the void. Within that column were faint striations, spiraling, converging toward a point. The same vortex geometry embedded in the earlier signals. And then came the sound. For the first time, the signal entered the audible spectrum. Radio receivers, phone towers, even home audio equipment picked it up. A low, harmonic resonance somewhere between a heartbeat and a bell. 12 seconds long. Then silence. When it ended, something changed in the atmosphere. Across the globe, magnetometers spiked simultaneously. Auroras erupted at latitudes far too low. Chile, Spain, Vietnam, even northern Australia, painting the night sky in colors unseen by any human generation. Witnesses described them as metallic rainbows. bands of green and violet light that shimmered not in arcs but in rings. Satellites recorded a faint particulate stream descending from the upper atmosphere, glinting like microscopic dust. Spectral analysis showed the particles weren't ice or plasma. They were metallic, crystalline, and isotopically identical to the trace nickel compounds once measured in 3I Atlas's sunward jet. The object hadn't just returned, it had shed something. By dawn, every world government with a space agency had declared temporary radio silence, not secrecy, literal silence. For 12 hours, humanity stopped broadcasting. No radar, no satellite uplinks, no high-frequency communication. The sky was left to itself, and in that silence, one last signal arrived. It wasn't tones this time, it wasn't numbers. It was a single broadband transmission that lasted for exactly 12 seconds, identical in duration to all that had come before. But embedded within the waveform, analysts discovered an image, not optical, but magnetic. When decoded, it revealed the pattern of Earth's magnetic field again. But now, the center, the dark circle that had once represented the eye, was gone. In its place was a mirrored spiral expanding outward, as if the eye had opened. One final burst of data followed, 12 repeating numbers, each one representing a harmonic multiple of 7.83 Hz, Earth fundamental Schumann resonance. The frequencies corresponded perfectly to the planet's natural electromagnetic modes. It was as if the signal was tuning us. Then, just as before, it stopped. No fading, no interference, silence. By the end of May, X-17A had vanished from every known coordinate. Infrared, optical, radar, nothing. As if it had never existed. Yet for weeks afterward, Earth's magnetic field continued to oscillate at the same resonant harmonics introduced by the signal. Some researchers claimed to hear faint rhythmic tones in the static of shortwave bands, 3 rising notes, 1 falling, then quiet. The official story closed itself neatly. Solar interaction anomaly resolved. The world moved on. But in observatories and data centers scattered across the planet, those who had seen the true pattern, the ones who'd watched the first silence, then the return, then the eye that opened, knew better. Because the 12 frequencies weren't random, they matched 12 orbital harmonics, 12 trajectories consistent with stable Lagrange points across the solar system, as if 12 seeds had been released, 12 points of light, 12 echoes waiting to awaken. And somewhere beyond the reach of every telescope, in the dark between planets, something moved again, not toward the sun, not toward Earth, but toward home. Part 14, The 12 Echoes. By the end of 2027, the world had convinced itself that 3I Atlas was gone. Official channels stopped mentioning X-17A. The media returned to politics, economics, war, and weather. The auroras faded. The hums ceased. The silence, once again, was comfortable. But science has a long memory. In December, while compiling residual magnetometer data, a small research team at the Finnish Meteorological Institute noticed faint spikes appearing every 30 days. They were weak, barely distinguishable from background noise, but mathematically exact. Each spike lasted 12 seconds, repeating across a harmonic ladder of 7.83, 14.3, 20.8, and 27.3 Hz, the same frequencies embedded in the final transmission. They weren't random, they were scheduled. Over the next 4 months, other observatories confirmed the same periodic signals. Each spike was separated by 30 days, shifting slightly westward in solar longitude every time, like clockwork. By March 2028, 12 discrete positions had been mapped, each corresponding to a stable gravitational point, either near a planet, a moon, or in deep interplanetary space. The world had dismissed 3I Atlas as a vanished anomaly, but its geometry had multiplied. 12 echoes, perfectly spaced, orbiting in silence. At first, these nodes, as they came to be called, were invisible to conventional optics. Then, in April, the James Webb Space Telescope recorded faint, symmetrical flares in near-infrared. Each flare matched one of the predicted coordinates. The objects weren't large, only a few dozen meters across, but they reflected sunlight with unnatural precision, like mirrors turning in unison. The scientific reaction was cautious at first. Perhaps these were small asteroids, dust clusters, or fragments of the original object. But when NASA ran thermal analysis, the results defied logic. Each object maintained a surface temperature of exactly 278 Kelvin, room temperature, not 1 degree higher. Not one lower. It was as if the 12 structures were regulating themselves, tuned to the same physical constant, the average temperature at which liquid water remains stable under atmospheric pressure. Earth temperature. That was when even the skeptics fell silent. ESA's internal report, never published but leaked months later, stated, "Thermal equilibrium maintenance at this precision implies active modulation. These are not fragments, they are systems. Systems, 12 of them, each positioned in a gravitationally stable point relative to a major body in the solar system, one near Venus. 2 near Earth's L4 and L5 points, 1 in lunar orbit, 3 scattered near the asteroid belt, 2 along Mars orbit, 3 beyond Jupiter near the Trojan regions. They weren't random placements, they were networked." For months, the nodes emitted nothing. No light, no radio, no movement. Just silence. But if you mapped their positions and connected them with straight lines, a pattern emerged. A massive geometric lattice stretching across the solar system, centered not on the Sun, but on Earth's orbit. It was a structure, and the geometry, the ratios between nodes, mirrored the same spiral patterns 3I Atlas had encoded in its final transmissions. The Fibonacci lattice, the golden symmetry, woven through the architecture of our solar system. NASA called it the harmonic field. In public, no one acknowledged it. But deep inside the classified archives of Project Aurora, one quiet directive appeared. Cease active broadcasts. Maintain global radio silence during perihelion. Do not stimulate the lattice. No explanation followed. But for those who had seen what 3I Atlas could do, its ability to absorb signals, mirror frequencies, and rewrite noise, the instruction was clear: don't wake it. Yet some people couldn't resist. In May 2028, an independent radio observatory in New Zealand, frustrated by the silence, transmitted a simple pulse toward the nearest node, coded in binary Fibonacci numbers. The response came 3 days later. Not a signal this time, a shadow. For 12 minutes, every satellite in Earth orbit experienced brief telemetry inversion. Data streams reversed, timestamps mirrored, images flipped like negatives. When systems recovered, nothing was damaged, but all clocks were precisely 12 seconds out of sync. Every clock on Earth. It was as if the entire planet had skipped forward 12 seconds into the future. Governments blamed solar interference. Scientists knew better. The nodes hadn't just heard us, they had answered, in the same language 3I Atlas had always used: geometry, ratio, time. And then, on June 1st, 2028, at exactly 000 UTC, one of the nodes near Earth's L4 point flickered. It emitted a beam, narrow, coherent, faint, and projected an image across the void. The reflection was captured by lunar orbiters and telescopes alike. It wasn't a symbol. It wasn't words. It was a map, not of the stars, of the solar system, our solar system, overlaid with 12 glowing spirals converging inward toward a single point between Earth and the Sun. At the center of that convergence was a void. A hollow region of absolute darkness. And in that void, faintly outlined, was the same eye that had once stared back at us from the signal. But this time, it wasn't looking toward Earth. It was looking beyond the Sun. Every model that simulated the geometry agreed on one conclusion. The lattice wasn't expanding. It was pointing. Something was coming. By late 2028, the data blackout returned. NASA's open servers shut down for maintenance. ESA's public archives froze. SETI's instruments went offline for hardware recalibration. The official explanation was banal, but those who had watched this story from the beginning knew the pattern: silence before revelation. And in that silence, the universe began to hum again, softly, rhythmically, with the same golden ratio timing that had defined every contact since 2025. 12 seconds, 12 tones, 12 echoes, each one growing louder, each one closer, each one aligned.